story about a tough CBS News reporter. CBS now confirming that the home and work computers of investigative journalist Sharyl Attkisson have been hacked. And Ms. Attkisson appears to know who did it.
This is not phishing. This is not malware. This is not an ordinary, as someone asked me, old boyfriend trying to look through my files.
Okay, this is big.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in order to go after somebody, you've got to have a suspicion. And I assume you have a suspicion. You don't have to tell me. I don't want to get your lawyers mad, but I assume you have a suspicion.
Well, I think I know, but I'm just not prepared to go into that. So we're continuing our investigation.
Right.
There are multifaceted, looks at what to do next.
Joining me now, Andrew McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, now with the Center for Law and Counterterrorism. So as a former federal prosecutor, when she says, I think I know, she's been in touch with experts and law enforcement. That means they probably do know. And what are they likely doing right now to ascertain for sure?
Well, she's a credible person. If anybody, just anybody said, well, I think I know, I think you would say, well, how does she know? But she's got a track record as a reputable reporter. What you're looking at in any kind of investigation, even with something this sophisticated, is pretty simple. Capability and motive. We have motive here considerably, I think, when you consider the fact that she was looking into things that the administration would prefer not to have.
Well, I want to pick up on that. Okay,
right.
So let's talk about motive, because she told Bill she knew it was not an ex-boyfriend. She knew it wasn't some personal grudge. And she talked about how her personal home computer at home would turn on overnight by itself.
Right.
And her CBS News computer also compromised. And that's all been confirmed. They found technology deep inside the computers. They used sophisticated methods, the hackers did, and then they tried to remove the indications of the unauthorized activity. Right. Here's what she said in terms of what she was working on. She believes it was business related.
What big stories were you working on?
Well, at the time I was doing Fast and Furious, of course, some green energy debacle sort of stimulus spending stories, and then later on the Benghazi stories.
All right, so they were all not complimentary to the administration. You weren't working on why is Barack Obama so brilliant and Obamacare the best thing in the world.
It's kind of what I do, whichever administration's in office. That's kind of what I do.
I'm not saying you're partisan, but I'm saying that the stuff you were going after, if the information came forth, might hurt the Obama administration. Is that accurate?
True.
So that speaks to possible motive.
Right. Well, and look, a lot of times this would be tinfoil hat time, right, if a person just made these kind of allegations about the government. Here, it's going to have some traction because we have a record of this particular administration not only pursuing journalists who are conducting investigations that are at times uncomfortable for the administration, but an overall use of their law enforcement and bureaucratic power to harass people who are, let's say, political dissenters. So it's a motive that has more credibility to follow up on.
And it comes at the same time, we learned, separate and apart from the DOJ spying on reporters scandal, that the NSA has the capability through its PRISM program to spy on our emails.
Yeah.
Now, they're supposed to have an indication of foreignness, but we know they have the capability to look at emails remotely, from their offices, to tap into the computer and take a look. And so it has people wondering.
Right. A lot of people have capabilities, but this was done in a particularly sophisticated way where they even went in, as you pointed out, and tried to purge evidence of the fact that they had been there in the first place. So the first thing I think I'd be looking at is who has the capability of doing this? And there are all kinds of people who can do hacking, but hacking on this kind of a level is, that's going to be a small circle of suspects. You have this government obviously has the capability to do it. The Chinese government, we've learned, has the capability.
But what do the Chinese care about Fast and Furious and Benghazi?
Well, assuming that you're on the right track about motive, then that's right.
How do we find out? Let's say, in the land of hypotheticals, what if the DOJ thought Sharyl Attkisson was like a James Rosen, another co-conspirator who must be stopped, and they got some warrant without Sharyl knowing about it or CBS knowing about it? How would we find out that they were the ones behind it?
Well, ultimately, they're supposed to reveal to the target, as you found out in the James Rosen case, even though it was delayed, they ultimately had to tell Rosen that he had been the subject of these procedures. So if they're acting lawfully and they had anything to do with it, eventually she'll know. If they're not acting lawfully, the only way that you find out that someone broke the law is by conducting an effective investigation. And in this cyber world, People leave prints just like they do in the world we're more familiar with. So, sure. So what you need is people who are competent to do this kind of a forensic investigation on people who've accessed your computer and your cyber history.
So it's potentially traceable who actually got the information and what they looked at. I mean, she probably knows whether they were interested in Fast and Furious or Benghazi, if it's one of those two, because they'll be able to tell her what the person accessed, correct?
Right. Well, that goes again to the motive. And a lot of people, look, people could have prurient interest and all kinds of interest and go into if they got access to your computer just because they were curious. But these folks have both a motive to do it and the capability.
Yeah, and
that's a small circle.
She also told Bill that none of her bank accounts were compromised, even though they could have been. So this is clearly not an attempt to fleece her accounts or just dig up embarrassing information on her.
Right.
I mean, Bill said last night if this actually was the federal government, that's a very hypothetical at this point. We don't know. That's a game changer. I mean, that's a huge deal if this was done to her. Correct?
No, I think it's correct. I think that's correct. I think it's a big problem for her. I think more broadly it should be of great concern to journalists, and not just journalists, but Americans. I mean, if the government is doing this sort of thing lawlessly, that's a big problem. It's even a bigger problem than misusing the law.
Yeah. And I'd like to hear more about what the feds are doing to help her track down the perpetrator.
Right.
And to make sure that every effort is being exhausted, because this can't go on. This can't go on. You can't have, at her home overnight, with her kids present, people accessing, basically sneaking into her home.
If they did it, and we don't want to get out in front of that.
Well, somebody did it. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So this can't go on, period.
Right.
So the feds need to take an interest in this, whether, no matter where the truth takes us.